Chapter 1, The Knock Beneath St. Peter's. If you've ever walked St. Peter's Basilica after the tourists are gone, you know the kind of silence I'm talking about. Not quiet. Silence with weight. The kind that presses against your eardrums like water at the bottom of a very deep lake. The marble drinks every footstep, every breath, every heartbeat, until you start to wonder if the building itself is listening. Sergeant Elena Rossi knew that silence better than most. November 22nd, 2025, 3:31 a.m. The bronze doors had been locked hours ago. The floodlights outside were off. Only the amber emergency strips glowed along the nave, turning Michelangelo's Pietà into something ghostly and unfinished. Elena's boots made no sound as she moved along the transept, halberd slung across her back the way tradition demanded, even if the real weapon was the beretta on her hip. 29 years old, 3 years in the Swiss Guard, and tonight she felt every minute of every sleepless hour she'd logged since September. She hadn't told anyone about the insomnia yet. Not the commander, not the chaplain, not even Luca, Father Moretti, who always noticed when her eyes were ringed in purple. She told herself it was just stress. New pope, new protocols, rumors of another health scare upstairs in the apostolic palace. Nothing supernatural, nothing a soldier couldn't handle. At 3:33 a.m. exactly, she would check the body cam footage later and see the timestamp burn itself into her memory. She stopped beneath the baldacchino, Bernini's twisted bronze columns rising above her like the ribs of some colossal dead thing. The altar was empty. The confessionals were empty. The whole basilica felt hollowed out, a shell waiting for morning to fill it again with voices and camera flashes. That was when she heard it. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, rising from directly beneath the marble slab under the soles of her boots. Thump, 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 not the muffled clank of old heating pipes, not the creak of stone settling after a warm day. These were knuckles on wood, patient, expectant. The sound carried the weight of someone who had all the time in the world and knew exactly where she was standing. Elena froze. The air changed. 1 second, it was the usual dry, incense-tinged chill. The next, it dropped so fast her breath bloomed white in front of her face. The tiny hairs on her forearms lifted under the sleeve of her uniform. She smelled something new cutting through the centuries of wax and frankincense. Damp earth, like a crypt that had just been opened after 1,000 years. Her hand went to the radio on her shoulder. Protocol said call it in. 2 clicks for routine, hold for emergency. Her thumb hovered. If she reported knocking under the floor, they'd laugh her out of the guard by sunrise. Italians already thought the Swiss were half monks, half Boy Scouts. She wasn't giving them ammunition, so she did the thing every horror story warns you never to do. She knocked back, once, firm, boot heel on marble. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It stretched, thick and listening. Then, from the exact same spot beneath her, thump, 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 an answer, perfectly timed, perfectly polite. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she felt it in her throat. She took 1 step back. The marble under her heel was ice cold now, colder than the air, as if something down there had sucked every degree of warmth straight through the stone. Frost spider-webbed outward from the spot, in a perfect circle the width of a manhole cover. delicate white veins racing across the red porphyry. She stared at it, breath shallow, telling herself it was condensation, telling herself anything. A single black feather drifted down from the darkness above the baldacchino and landed on the frost. Not a pigeon feather, too long, too glossy, the kind of black that drinks light instead of reflecting it. It settled on the ice like it belonged there. Elena had never seen a bird inside the basilica, not once, not in 3 years. She drew her sidearm without thinking, the click of the safety loud as a gunshot in the silence. The barrel trembled just slightly. She forced it steady. Swiss Guard training. Breathe, assess, dominate the environment. Identify yourself, she said in Italian, then German, then Latin, because sometimes Latin felt like armor. Nothing answered, only the feather, rocking gently as if an unseen breath stirred it. She backed away slowly, eyes locked on the frost circle. 10 meters, 20. When she reached the gate to the grottos, she risked a glance at her watch. 3:37 a.m. 4 minutes. It had taken 4 minutes for the holiest floor on earth to answer her like a coffin lid. Later, in the barracks, she would strip off her uniform and find that same black feather tucked inside her pillowcase. No window open, no explanation, just the feather and the faint smell of turned earth that clung to the fabric for days. She didn't sleep again that night, and somewhere far below the basilica, in corridors no official map acknowledges, something that had waited centuries finally knew the new guard's name. Chapter 2, The Bricked Up Breath. The Confessio is the holiest trench in Christendom, a sunken semicircle directly beneath the high altar where pilgrims kneel to touch the supposed tomb of St. Peter himself. By day it hums with whispered prayers in 100 languages. By night it belongs to the restorers, 3 Romanian workers in white coveralls, floodlights, and the low growl of compressors sucking centuries of candle soot from Bernini's bronze. On the 3rd night of November 2025, the growl stopped. Marius, the oldest of the crew, killed the suction hose and stared at the wall he'd been cleaning. A section of 16th century brickwork had been hidden behind a steel scaffold pole for decades. Now the pole was gone, and the bricks looked wrong, too even, too new compared to the patchwork around them. He ran a gloved finger along the mortar. It crumbled like dry cake. Someone walled this up in a hurry, he muttered in Romanian. His partner, Danny, wedged a crowbar into the seam. One pry, and the first brick popped free with a soft sigh, as if the wall had been holding its breath for 400 years. Cold air rolled out, damp, heavy, carrying the smell of river mud and old bone. The temperature in the Confessio dropped so fast their floodlights flickered. Breath plumed white. They should have stopped. Protocol is clear. Any structural anomaly gets reported up the chain before another brick is touched. But curiosity is older than protocol, and the darkness beyond that single missing brick looked deliberate, like a mouth waiting to speak. By the time the 3rd brick hit the marble floor, the opening was the size of a confessional window. The air pouring through it was no longer just cold. It moved, a slow, rhythmic exhalation, in and out, as though something enormous on the other side was breathing through the hole. Marius leaned in with his headlamp, and the breathing stopped. In the sudden vacuum, every candle in the basilica above guttered at once. down in the trench. The three men felt it in their chests, a pressure drop, like an airplane losing altitude too fast. Danny crossed himself, the youngest, Luca's namesake but no relation, took one step back and slipped on the frost, already forming under their boots. Frost. In November? Yes, but not inside a heated basilica, and not in perfect, repeating patterns. They shone their lamps on the marble, there, radiating outward from the walled arch like the ripples of a stone dropped in black water. Were the crossed keys of St. Peter frozen into the stone, but upside down? The loops pointed toward the floor, the shafts toward heaven, exactly the way occultists draw them when they want to say something very different about who really holds the keys to the kingdom. Marius whispered a prayer that ended in a curse. Within 20 minutes, the site was sealed tighter than a pharaoh's tomb. Swiss guard in plain clothes formed a perimeter. The Romanians were escorted out, paid triple overtime, and sworn to silence under penalties that made their knees knock. Phones were confiscated. Memories, they were told, could be edited later if necessary. Father Luca Moretti received the call while celebrating the 6:30 a.m. Mass in a side chapel. His sacristan slipped him a note on handmade paper. Come now, confessio, bring no one, V.K. He knew the initials. Everyone in the Vatican who dealt with things that didn't fit in filing cabinets knew Monsignor Victor Kane. Luca arrived still wearing his chasuble, the gold embroidery catching the emergency floods like fish scales. Elena Rossi was already there, helmet under one arm, eyes bloodshot from another night without sleep. She gave him the smallest shake of the head. Don't ask me what I think this is. Not yet. Kane waited in the trench like a black heron, long coat buttoned to the throat despite the cold, 70 if he was a day. But the man never seemed to blink. His skin had the waxy pallor of someone who hadn't seen direct sunlight since the Berlin Wall fell. You kept the frost intact, Luca observed, kneeling. The upside-down keys were still there, delicate as lace, already beginning to melt under the lamps. Touch nothing, Kane said. His voice was soft, almost kind, the way a surgeon sounds before the scalpel. Some doors were bricked for reasons that still breathe. Luca looked up sharply. You've seen this sigil before. I've seen what happens when it appears uninvited. Kane produced a small silver aspergillum and flicked holy water across the frost, where the droplets landed. The ice hissed and turned black, as if burned. Pope Sixtus V ordered this arch sealed in 1586. The masons were executed the same week. Their tongues were removed first, then their hands. The records say it was for theft. The records lie. Elena's knuckles whitened on her helmet. The air coming out of that hole is moving in pulses. Like lungs. Kane's eyes flicked to her, something almost like pity in them. Some lungs were never meant to stop, Sergeant. They just learned to breathe slower. Luca stood. The smell hit him then. Myrrh. Yes, but underneath it, the iron tang of old blood and something sweeter, like milk left too long in the sun. His scholar's mind raced through inventories. No catacomb on any map opened here. The necropolis level was 20 feet below them, and its air was dry, dead. This was alive. He took one step closer to the hole. Don't, Elena said, voice cracking for the first time since Luca had known her. He looked back. She wasn't warning him about falling bricks. Her gaze was fixed on the darkness beyond the missing bricks, pupils blown wide, as if she'd seen something move. Cain placed a gloved hand on Luca's shoulder, weight like a coffin lid. The Holy Father has been informed. He has granted us 48 hours before the wall is rebuilt, thicker, deeper, and this time with rebar blessed in the blood of a living saint. After that, this arch never existed. You understand? Luca understood many things in that moment. That the church had buried more than martyrs beneath its foundations. That Cain was terrified, and Cain was never terrified, and that the frost keys were already melting into ordinary water, taking their inverted promise with them, but not before Luca saw. In the second before the last shard dissolved, a single black feather caught in the ice. Quill pointed downward like an arrow showing the way. He looked at Elena. She looked at him. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. Whatever had been breathing for 4 centuries had just taken its first full breath in daylight, and it knew they were listening. Chapter 3. The Archive That Has No Catalog. The elevator cage rattled like old bones as it dropped past the level where tours end and even most cardinals never go. Father Luca Moretti gripped the brass rail, his priestly black already dusted gray from the brick dust they'd chipped away 2 nights ago. Beside him, Elena Rossi stood at rigid attention, halberd left behind for once. Down here, the ancient polearm felt childish, like bringing a crucifix to a gunfight. Monsignor Victor Cain rode in silence ahead of them, gloved fingers drumming that same unnerving rhythm on the gate. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Not Morse anymore. Luca realized with a chill it was the Trinity inverted. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, but pleaded with backward. The cage lurched to a halt with a metallic scream that echoed too long, as if the shaft itself went down forever. No floor number glowed on the panel. Cain produced the black iron key again, the one with teeth like tiny faces frozen mid-screen, and unlocked a gate that had no business existing. Beyond it lay a corridor hewn straight into the tufa rock of Vatican Hill, walls glistening with moisture that caught the weak beam of Cain's lantern and threw it back distorted, like light seen through tears. Luca had spent 15 years in the published secret archives above, acres of climate-controlled shelves where the air tasted of vellum and quiet power, where even the dust was cataloged. This was no archive. This was a throat. Their footsteps sounded wrong here, too crisp at first, then swallowed entirely, as if the stone decided when it wanted to hear you coming. The temperature plummeted with every meter, the kind of cold that seeps into marrow and makes old wounds ache. Elena's breath came in short puffs. She walked with one hand near her sidearm now, the professional mask cracking just enough for Luca to see the raw fear beneath. "You feel it too," he whispered. She didn't answer, didn't need to. The air carried that same tomb breath they'd tasted at the bricked arch, only thicker now, laced with something sweeter, overripe fruit left in a confessional, perhaps, or the memory of milk gone bad. Cain led them past the first set of shelves without comment. They rose on either side like cathedral pillars, but these held no gilded missals or illuminated gospels. The books, if books was even the right word, were bound in materials that made Luca's scholar's stomach turn. Some covers looked like sharkskin, gray and pebbled. Others were pale and hairless, with faint blue veins visible beneath the surface. One volume, larger than any man could comfortably lift, had a binding that shifted color when the lantern light hit it, from corpse white to bruised purple and back again. The titles, where they existed, were branded rather than inked, the letters raised and scarred. Human skin, Luca thought, then immediately tried to unthink it. The church had preserved relics in stranger ways, but these weren't saints. Kane stopped at a junction where 5 corridors met beneath a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. The Archivio Segreto Vero, he said, voice flat. The true secret archive. What tourists see upstairs is the children's menu. This is what the church was built to contain. Elena swept her flashlight across the nearest shelf. The beam caught a row of slim volumes the color of dried blood. Their spines bore no titles, only symbols, the papal tiara upside down, the keys crossed and broken, a lamb with 7 eyes weeping black tears. Her light trembled. "These aren't Latin," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Some of these scripts I've never seen. Some were never meant to be seen," Kane replied. "The Tower of Babel wasn't destroyed. It was brought here, page by page, and taught to keep quiet." Luca moved deeper, drawn despite himself. His fingers, traitors, brushed the spine of a folio bound in what felt like velvet, but wasn't. The cover was warm, pulsing faintly, like a throat swallowing. He pulled away as if burned. They pressed on. The shelves grew denser, the passages narrower, until the 3 of them walked single file, with the walls brushing their shoulders. The smell shifted, less tomb now, more library, the comforting ghost of old paper, but undercut with something metallic, like blood on a communion chalice. Kane halted before a reading table carved from a single slab of black marble. On it lay a ledger, newer than the rest. Its leather cover cracked and government stamped, property of the Institute for Works of Religion, 1947, the Vatican Bank. Luca's pulse quickened. He'd heard whispers of wartime projects, scientists sheltered behind these walls after the fall of Berlin, Operation Paperclip's Catholic cousin. He opened it with reverent care. The pages crackled like autumn leaves. Entries in meticulous Italian, then German, then a cipher that resolved itself in his mind almost against his will. 15th of March, 1947. Father Pellegrino Ernetti reports successful temporal displacement. Subject viewed crucifixion from Golgotha Ridge. 1452. Local. Image stable for 43 seconds. Witnessed phenomenon. Figure in crowd. Roman centurion. Oriented toward apparatus. Made direct eye contact. Ernetti terminated session prematurely. Recommends immediate disassembly. 17th of March. Holy Father approves continuation. Project Chronovisor declared operational under direct papal jurisdiction. All further records to be maintained in Vero Archive. Ernetti expresses concern. The past is watching back. Luca's mouth went dry. The Chronovisor. He dismissed it as fringe nonsense, a hoax cooked up by a Benedictine monk with too much time and not enough oversight. But here it was, in Vatican ledger ink, stamped with the papal seal. "There's more," Kane said quietly. Almost gently, the final entry. Dated 1952, device relocated to sub-level 7 following incident with Cardinal Tisserant. Blood residue on viewing screen could not be removed by conventional means. Ernetti claims the blood is not from our timeline, recommends permanent sealing. Pope Pius XV has decreed the chronovisor will remain accessible only to those who understand what it truly cost to look. Luca closed the ledger. The cover felt heavier now, as if the words inside had gained mass. That's when Elena stiffened beside him. She had wandered a few paces ahead, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom toward a shelf of what looked like prayer books, small, innocent, bound in soft brown leather. But her light had frozen on a single volume whose cover bore the embroidered insignia of the Swiss Guard, the crossed keys beneath the papal umbrella. Her name was stitched beneath it in gold thread, Elena Rossi. The book opened by itself. Pages fluttered, though no wind stirred the air. They settled on a blank sheet that began to fill with handwriting, childlike, careful, in perfect German cursive. Wachtmeister Rossi. You were supposed to protect the keys. Why did you let them turn? The flashlight slipped from Elena's fingers and clattered to the stone floor, spinning its beam in frantic circles that made the shadows dance like mad things. In the strobing light, Luca saw it, a child's handprint on the wall beside her, palm pressed flat as if someone very small had been pushing. Trying to get out, the print was fresh, wet, the color of old rust. The voice came then, not from the book, not from the walls, but from inside Elena's own ear, intimate as a lover's whisper spoken in flawless, antique German. Komm näher, Wachtmeister, ich warte schon so lange. Come closer, Sergeant, I've been waiting so long. Elena spun, pistol drawn, breath ragged. The corridor behind her was empty, but the temperature around her alone had dropped so low that frost bloomed across the barrel of her Beretta in delicate, key-shaped patterns, upside down again, always upside down. Kane didn't move to help her. He only watched, something ancient and sorrowful in his eyes. The archive remembers everyone who enters, he said softly, especially those sworn to guard what should stay buried. Luca reached for Elena's arm and felt her trembling, not the disciplined shake of a soldier, but the full-body shudder of someone whose entire world had just tilted on its axis. In the darkness beyond the lantern's reach, something giggled, the sound of a child delighted to finally be found. And deeper still, from corridors that branched away into forever, came the faint metallic click of a machine warming up, brass tubes expanding, vacuum tubes glowing with a light that had no business existing 70 years after it was meant to be dismantled. And the past wasn't just watching, it was about to speak. Chapter 4. The Room That Watched Crucifixion. The corridor narrowed until the shelves pressed in like the ribs of some fossilized beast, forcing them to turn sideways, shoulders brushing bindings that felt too soft, too responsive. Luca's cassock snagged on something, a protruding clasp shaped like a tiny hand, and when he yanked free, the fabric tore with a wet sound, leaving a strip fluttering like a bandage on a corpse. Elena walked behind him now, her breathing shallow and controlled, the way soldiers breathe when they're counting steps to an ambush. Kane led without looking back, as if he knew the path by the way the darkness tasted. They passed alcoves where objects that had no business existing outside a nightmare were displayed on black velvet, a crown of thorns that dripped something darker than rust when the air stirred, A chalice with lips worn smooth by centuries of kisses that left no trace of devotion. A child's sandal, Roman style, the leather still supple, the sole imprinted with a tiny, perfect hoof. Then the shelves ended abruptly, opening into a chamber that shouldn't fit beneath Vatican Hill. It was vast, domed, the ceiling lost in shadow so complete it might as well have been the night sky turned inside out. In the center stood the machine, even in the feeble glow of Cain's lantern. It demanded reverence and terror in equal measure. A skeletal throne of brass and mahogany, its arms terminating in reliquaries, splinters of the true cross, nails blackened with age, a fragment of purple cloth that might once have mocked a king, tubes of hand-blown glass coiled from the back like the intestines of some mechanical seraph, connecting to a screen of polished obsidian framed in gold, vacuum tubes, long dead by modern standards, protruded from the base like the teeth of a buried giant. Wires wrapped in silk, threaded with silver, ran to a control panel covered in keys labeled not in Latin, but in Aramaic, the language Christ himself spoke when he cursed the fig tree. Luca had read the ledger. He knew what this was. But knowing and standing before it were different animals entirely. The chronovisor, Cain said, voice barely above the hum that had already begun emanating from the device, as if it sensed their heartbeats and synchronized. Built by men who should have known better, Father Ernetti believed he could witness salvation. Instead, he built a window that something else learned to look through. Elena circled it slowly, boots silent on the dust that here lay inches thick, undisturbed since, when 1952 earlier, the dust was wrong, fine as ash, with flecks that caught the light like mica, or like dried blood ground to powder. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then hated herself for saying it. The throne's seat was contoured for a human body, worn smooth by use. Someone had sat here, many someones, for hours, watching. Cain placed the lantern on the floor. The shadows retreated just enough to reveal frescoes on the walls, faded, but not by time, erased deliberately. Faces scratched out with what looked like fingernails. Only the eyes remained, hundreds of them, painted in a style that predated Christianity by centuries, watching the machine, watching them. "We shouldn't," Lucas said, but his hand was already reaching for the activation lever. The scholar in him, the part that had dedicated his life to uncovering truths the church preferred buried, overrode the priest. Just once, to see if it's real. Cain didn't stop him, only watched with that sorrowful expression deepening into something that might have been pity or envy. The lever moved with a sound like bone setters, realigning a dislocated shoulder. The machine woke with a sigh that was almost human. The vacuum tubes glowed a sickly amber, then violet, then a red that pulsed in time with Luca's own heart. The obsidian screen rippled like water disturbed by a stone, clearing to reveal Golgotha, not a reconstruction, not a vision, the real hill of skulls, under a sky the color of bruised flesh. The air that poured from the speakers, because there were speakers, hidden in the throne's headrest, was thick with the sounds of suffering, the wet thud of hammer on nail, the guttural Aramaic curses of soldiers dicing for garments, the terrible animal keening of women who had come to watch their world end. 3 crosses dominated the frame. The middle one held a man who should have been beyond recognition, but wasn't. The camera, whatever impossible lens Ernetti had crafted, zoomed slowly, reverently, toward the figure crowned with thorns. Blood ran in rivulets down the wood, pooling at the base where flies the size of thumbnails feasted. Luca fell to his knees, not in prayer, in recognition. This was no hologram, no clever projection. The smell hit him then, vinegar and myrrh, sweat and excrement, the copper tang of blood so fresh it made his mouth water like Pavlov's dog. Elena made a sound that was half sob, half retch. Her rosary slipped from her fingers and clattered to the stone. The crucifix landing face down. On screen, Christ's head lifted. The eyes, those eyes that had looked on Jerusalem with love and wept, fixed directly on the lens, directly on them. Time fractured. The figure on the cross smiled, not the beatific smile of Renaissance paintings. This was something raw, knowing, almost amused. The lips, split and bleeding, shaped words in perfect, modern Italian that issued not from the speakers, but from inside Luca's skull. Finally, I've been waiting. The screen bled. It started as a single drop, welling from the corner of the obsidian, dark and viscous, defying gravity to crawl upward, then another and another, until the entire surface wept blood that pattered onto the floor with the soft insistence of summer rain on a coffin lid. The smell was overwhelming, hot, fresh, impossible. Elena screamed, actually screamed, the sound tearing from her throat like something being born wrong. She scrambled backward, boots slipping in the growing pool, and fetched up against the wall where those scratched-out fresco faces seemed to lean closer. Eager for the show, Luca couldn't move. The blood reached his knees, warm as bathwater, soaking through his cassock. In it, he saw reflections, not of the chamber, but of other viewings. Faces of popes long dead, their eyes wide with the same realization he felt blooming in his chest like poison ivy. They had built a peephole into hell, and hell had installed a mirror. Cain finally moved. He slammed the lever back with a violence that cracked brass. The image on screen stuttered, Christ's smiling face distorting into something elongated and wrong, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror made of screaming souls. The blood kept coming for 3 more heartbeats, then stopped as abruptly as a throat cut. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. The obsidian screen went black, but not empty. In its depths, something moved, a shape that resolved slowly into the outline of a child, standing where the cross had been, the same child whose voice had whispered to Elena in German. It raised one hand in a wave that was almost shy. Then the screen cracked, a single fissure running from the bottom to the top, weeping one final drop that landed on Luca's outstretched hand and burned like acid. Cain's voice, when it came, was barely recognizable. Ernetti thought he was witnessing salvation. He never understood that salvation has to look both ways. Elena was on her feet now, pistol drawn and shaking, pointing at the machine that was no longer just a machine. What the hell was that? Not hell, Cain said. And for the first time, the man looked old, truly old. Worse, something that was there when the nails went in, something that enjoyed it. Luca stared at the blood on his hands. It wasn't drying. It was soaking in. staining the lifelines of his palms the color of old wine. In the distance, impossibly distant, as if carried through centuries on the wings of that terrible smile, he heard nails being hammered again, slow, deliberate, patient. The chronovisor had shown them the past, but the past had just taken their photographs, and somewhere in the dark between then and now, something was developing the negatives. Chapter 5. 6 Fingers on the Bones of Saints. The blood on Luca's palms had crusted into dark flakes by the time they left the chronovisor chamber, but it still itched, as if tiny things were burrowing deeper into the wounds of his stigmata-like burns. None of them spoke, as Cain led them past the cracked obsidian throne. The machine behind them gave one last wet click, like a throat clearing, and then fell silent. The silence felt worse than the screaming had. They descended, not in the rattling cage this time, but through a spiral stair cut into the raw tufa. So narrow their shoulders scraped the walls. The air grew warmer with every turn, thick with the mineral breath of underground rivers no map acknowledged. Elena's body cam, a tiny black pin on her collar, standard issue for high-risk details, was recording everything. She had thumbed it on the moment Cain's back turned. If they didn't make it out, someone would see. Someone had to. Luca's rosary swung against his chest with each step, the crucifix tapping like a metronome, counting down to something he no longer believed in. After what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. The stair ended at a gate of black iron, twisted into the shape of uprooted olive trees, the kind Gethsemane might have grown if the garden had been cursed instead of prayed in. Cain produced another key, smaller this time, its bow molded into a 6-fingered hand. The lock sighed open like an old man waking from a nightmare. Beyond lay the real necropolis, not the sanitized scavvy tour where schoolchildren snap selfies beside Peter's supposed bones. This was deeper, older, pre-Constantinian. The air here tasted of myrrh gone rancid and wet dog. Niches lined the walls, but they weren't empty. Some held ossuaries labeled in archaic Latin. Others cradled skeletons laid out like lovers waiting for resurrection morning. Their bones glowed faintly under Cain's lantern, phosphorescence from minerals in the rock, or something less natural. Elena's breath caught in the central chamber, directly beneath the high altar's vertical axis, directly beneath the baldacchino, the confessio. The knocking that had started everything stood 7 biers of black marble. On each lay a skeleton. They were enormous, 10, 11, 12 feet tall, the proportions wrong in ways that hurt to look at directly. Rib cages wide enough to cradle a man, spines curved like drawn bows, and the skulls, elongated, dolichocephalic, with heavy brow ridges and jaws that could have crushed stone. Double rows of teeth glinted, some still sharp after millennia. But it was the hands that made Luca drop to his knees a second time in one night. 6 fingers on each hand, perfectly articulated, the extra digit placed symmetrically between the usual 4th and 5th, as if God had added one for good measure and then changed his mind. Remnants of cloth clung to the bones, cloth that had once been white, now the color of dried blood. Fragments of embroidery caught the light, triple crowns, papal tiaras worked in gold thread, now black with age. One skeleton still wore a pallium, the circular band of wool that only popes and archbishops may dawn, its black crosses inverted. Cain set the lantern on the floor. Shadows leapt across the giants like living things. Nephilim, he said, almost reverent. The church didn't just hide them, we crowned them. Luca couldn't speak. His tongue felt thick, coated in the same blood that had poured from the chronovisor screen. He crawled forward on his knees, priest reduced to penitent, and touched the nearest foot. The metatarsals were as long as his forearm. The bone was warm, not room temperature warm, body warm. There's supposed to be myth, Elena whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. The body cam's tiny red light blinked steadily, drinking it all in. Genesis 6, the sons of God and the daughters of men, giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, Cain finished, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. The church has always preferred the edited version. He moved among the biers like a tour guide in a museum of abominations, trailing gloved fingers over a tibia thick as a man's thigh. Constantine didn't convert the empire, he said. He made a deal. These bloodlines sat on the throne of Peter for centuries, hidden in plain sight. The tall popes you read about, John the 13th, was 6'5". Remember? Vigilius, Silvius. The rest, historians call them anomalies. We called them relics. Luca's laugh came out strangled. You're telling me the papacy was part angel? Part something, Cain corrected. The flood didn't kill them all. Some were smuggled beneath Rome before the waters rose, protected, venerated, their seed kept pure, generation after generation. Because the church believed their blood carried authority no election could grant. Divine right, literally. Elena circled the biers, body cam sweeping in slow arcs. Her free hand rested on her beretta, but the gesture looked childish now, like threatening a mountain. Why show us? She asked. If this is so secret. Because the bloodline is ending, Cain said simply. The current Holy Father is the last with the marker. 6 fingers on the left foot. He hides it with custom shoes. When he dies, the chain breaks, and what was bound wakes up angry. He stopped at the 7th bier. It was empty. Only a stain remained, shaped vaguely like a man, darker than the marble, as if something had lain there so long its outline had burned into the stone. At the head of the bier lay a single object, a papal mitre, fresh, white, embroidered with the crossed keys in gold. No dust, no age, as if it had been placed there yesterday. Luca's faith, already cracked by smiling crucified gods and bleeding machines, shattered completely. He felt it go, the way a glacier calves, a soundless violence inside the chest. All his life he had served an institution built on a lie so colossal it had required the bones of demons to prop it up. Elena zoomed the body cam on the empty bier. Where is it? She asked, voice flat with the calm that comes right before screaming or shooting. The 7th. Cain's answer was barely a breath. Walking. A sound echoed then from the far end of the chamber. Where the necropolis tunneled deeper into darkness, no lantern had ever pierced. Footsteps, slow, heavy, the stride of something that had forgotten how doorways were sized for men. Thud, thud, thud. Each impact sent dust sifting from the ceiling like grave snow. The temperature spiked, sudden and humid, carrying the stench of wet feathers and hot iron. Elena raised her pistol with both hands, so Luca scrambled to his feet, clutching his rosary like a garrote. Cain alone did not move. He only smiled, that thin, sorrowful smile that now looked like anticipation. The footsteps stopped just beyond the lantern's reach. Something exhaled, a sound like a forge bellows, or a dying angel. Then, in the darkness, 6 fingers, long, pale, jointed wrong, curled around the edge of the wall and began to pull the rest of it into the light. Elena's body cam kept recording, long after the screaming started. Chapter 6. The Third Secret in Sister Lucia's Own Blood. They didn't run from the necropolis. Running would have meant admitting what they'd seen could catch them. Instead, they walked, fast, mechanical, the way people move in dreams when the air turns to tar. Cain sealed the iron gate behind them with the 6-fingered key, and the click of the lock sounded final, like a coffin lid no one would ever open again. Elena's body cam battery indicator blinked red. She'd been recording for hours. Luca's hands still trembled from the warmth of those impossible bones, the extra joints flexing under his touch like they remembered being alive. Up the spiral stair, past the chronovisor's chamber, where the machine now sat dark and sullen, the cracked obsidian screen weeping slow tears of blood that had already soaked a perfect circle into the dust. Cain didn't glance at it. He moved with purpose now, coat flapping like broken wings, leading them deeper into corridors that slanted downward again. No, sideways, logic fracturing the way old frescoes flake from damp walls. Elena's earpiece crackled with static that resolved into a child's hum, the same off-key note she'd heard in the archive. She ripped the earpiece out and crushed it under her boot. The humming didn't stop. It was inside her now. They emerged into a vault so small it felt like a confessional built for titans. The walls were lined with lead-lined boxes the size of breviaries, each sealed with wax the color of dried heart blood. In the center stood a lectern of human femur. Luca recognized the ball joints, the unnatural length, and on it lay a single sheet of paper protected beneath a crystal dome yellowed with age. Cain lifted the dome with reverence usually reserved for the Eucharist. The paper beneath was brittle, edges curled like burnt petals, handwritten in brown ink that had once been red. Sister Lucia dos Santos, Coimbra, 1960. The Third Secret of Fatima, the real one, not the sanitized version released in 2000, with its tidy vision of a pope martyred by bullets and the comforting assurance that everything would be fine if people just prayed the rosary harder. This was the text John the Baptist had read and allegedly turned white as the host, the one Paul VI locked away, the one John Paul II buried deeper after the assassination attempt that somehow fulfilled only half the prophecy. Luca had studied the official release until he could quote it backward. This was longer, much longer, and the ink wasn't ink. He leaned closer. The scent hit him first, iron and salt, the way a slaughterhouse smells after the hoses have run. The later paragraphs weren't written in the sepia of oxidized gallatanic ink. They were written in blood, Lucia's blood. The handwriting grew frantic toward the bottom. letters slanting as if the pen had been shaking too hard to control. Cain's voice was almost tender. She cut her own arm to finish it, said the Virgin demanded a sacrifice equal to the truth. Elena circled the lectern, body cam whirring softly. Read it, she said. Not a request, a soldier's order. Luca began aloud, voice cracking like thin ice. In the third part of the secret, the Holy Father will pass through a great city, half in ruins. But this will not be the worst. The worst is this: the apostasy will come from within. It will sit upon the throne of Peter and wear the fisherman's ring. It will speak with the voice of the Lamb, but command with the tongue of the serpent. Many shepherds will follow, believing they serve heaven when they serve the one who was cast out. His throat closed. He'd expected fire and brimstone, Antichrist imagery, the usual apocalyptic theater. This was quieter, more intimate, a betrayal from the top. He kept reading. The faithful will be asked to kiss the hand that betrays them. Consecration will be promised and withheld. The smoke of Satan has already entered the sanctuary. But soon, the sanctuary itself will become the furnace. The handwriting changed halfway down the page. The careful Carmelite script, Lucia's lifelong discipline, gave way to something childlike, looping, almost playful. The ink, no. The blood grew fresher, wetter, as if the wound had reopened mid-sentence. Latin now, perfect classical Latin, in a hand no nun from Coimbra should have known. Pater Luca, it wrote, you were always going to read this. I waited for you the way I waited for her. The ring is almost ready. The keys are turning backward. Soon you will choose whose side the angels stand on. Luca stumbled back as if slapped. The words weren't addressed to the world. They were addressed to him, personally. The child's voice, the one that had whispered to Elena in German, that had giggled in the archive, spilled from the page now. No longer a whisper, but a chorus, sweet and terrible. Father, don't you recognize me? I was there when they drove the nails. I held the sponge. I smiled for the camera. The paper lifted from the lectern, though no wind stirred the air. It hovered at eye level. The blood ink sentences writhing like living things, rearranging themselves into new configurations. Elena Rossi, you were supposed to protect him. Why did you let him fall? Elena made a sound like a wounded animal. The body cam's red light flared, then died, battery drained in seconds, though it had been at 80%. Frost spiderwebbed across the lens anyway, forming the upside-down keys again, but this time with a sixth finger added to the cross. Cain finally moved. He snatched the page out of the air and pressed it flat beneath the crystal dome, slamming the lid so hard the femur lectern cracked. The voice cut off mid-syllable, leaving only the echo of a child's delighted laughter bouncing around the lead-lined walls. She knew, Cain said, voice raw. Lucia knew the secret wasn't about Russia or war. It was about succession, about who or what would wear the ring after the last true pope. The apostasy isn't coming. It's already here, and it's hungry. Luca stared at his hands. The burns from the chronovisor blood had reopened, weeping the same dark fluid that stained the page. On his left palm, in the center of the wound, a perfect circle was forming, the exact size of the fisherman's ring. Elena backed toward the door. Pistol drawn again, though bullets felt laughable now. We're leaving. We take this. We go public. You go public, Cain said, almost gently, and the church dies screaming, not from scandal, from what crawls out when the seals break. He pointed to the bottom of the page, where Lucia's final line, written in her own blood before the child took over, was still visible. Pray for the Pope, who will betray you with a kiss, and pray harder for the ones who let him. The lights in the vault flickered once, twice, then steadied. In that stutter of darkness, Luca saw it, a shadow on the wall behind Cain, tall as the Nephilim skeletons, wearing a white cassock and a smile full of too many teeth. When the light returned, the shadow was gone, but the fisherman's ring on Cain's gloved hand, the one he'd worn for decades as custodian of secrets, was cracked cleanly in two, and something inside the crack was looking out. Chapter 7. The Exorcist's Private Ledger. Cain didn't lead them back the way they came. Instead, he took a side passage so narrow their shoulders scraped damp stone, the air growing thicker with every step, laced with the sharp bite of frankincense burned too long ago to save anyone. Luca's mind reeled from the third secret, the child's handwriting still crawling across his vision like ants when he blinked. The ring-shaped burn on his palm throbbed in time with his pulse, as if something inside the wound was trying to match the beat of a larger heart. Elena walked last, one hand pressed to her ear where the child's German whisper had burrowed. A thin trickle of blood had dried on her collar. She hadn't noticed yet. Her body cam was dead weight now, but she kept it on anyway. A soldier's habit when ammunition runs out. You still carry the rifle. The passage opened into a monk's cell that had no business being this deep. Low vaulted ceiling. A straw pallet long rotted to dust. Iron rings bolted into the wall for chains that were still there, pitted and black. A single crucifix hung crooked, the corpus missing its arms, snapped off cleanly, as if something had grown tired of being reminded. In the center sat a lectern of dark wood, scarred by what looked like claw marks. On it rested the ledger, not a book, a fortress of books, 4 centuries of them, bound together with iron clasps and locks that had rusted shut and been replaced so many times the covers looked armored. The top volume was newer, black leather stamped with the date 2024 in gold that hadn't tarnished. No title, just a single word branded deep. Damon. Cain didn't touch it. He only stared, the way a man stares at the grave of someone he killed. Every chief exorcist of Rome has added to this, he said, from Father Girolamo Menghi in 1587 to Father Amorth and beyond. They wrote what the church could never admit aloud, possessions inside the apostolic palace, not peasants in muddy villages, not nuns in remote convents, cardinals, archbishops, secretaries of state. He unlocked the newest clasp with a key that hung around his neck on a chain thick enough to moor a ship. The cover opened with a sound like vertebrae popping. Luca leaned in first. The pages were thin vellum, some human skin. He knew the texture now. After the archive, and the ink varied, iron gall, sepia, modern ballpoint, and in places something thicker that had dried to a brittle crimson glaze. The entries were clinical at first. Dates, names, symptoms. 5th October 1623, Pope Gregory XV spoke in the voice of a woman burned at the stake in 1415, claimed the ashes still remembered, exorcism performed in the Sala Regia, successful after 7 hours. His Holiness vomited nails. May 1878, Pope Leo XIII, after composing the prayer to Saint Michael, collapsed in his study, levitated 3 feet above the floor while reciting the vision backward. The prayer was ordered printed immediately to bind what he had seen. Luca's breath hitched. He'd always wondered why Leo had suddenly mandated the St. Michael prayer after Mass. Historians called it a mystical experience. The ledger called it containment. Elena read over his shoulder, voice flat with the detachment soldiers use when the horror gets too big to process. 1943, she said. Pius XII, during the bombing of Rome, found naked in the Sistine Chapel, painting inverted pentagrams with his own feces while singing the Dies Irae in a child's soprano. She turned the page herself. Her fingers left bloody prints. She hadn't noticed the bleeding had started again, fresh now, dripping from both ears in steady rivulets that soaked her collar dark. Kane watched her the way a doctor watches a patient bleed out when the tourniquet is already too late. The entries grew shorter as the centuries wore on, as if the exorcists themselves had less and less hope to spare on words. 1978, Pope John Paul III found dead after 33 days. Official cause, heart attack. Actual cause, entity refused to leave when ordered. Body showed signs of spontaneous combustion from within. Ashes smelled of frankincense and sulfur. Elena's voice cracked as she read the most recent page aloud, unable to stop herself, the way people can't stop picking at a scab that bleeds worse each time. 15th of November 2024, Cardinal Angelo Rizzo, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, entered his apartments at 2311 complaining of headache. At 2333 began speaking Latin backward, fluent, no hesitation, levitated 1 meter above the bed, eyes rolled white, mouth emitted black feathers. When I attempted the rite of exorcism, the entity addressed me by my true name, the one I had before ordination, and laughed. It said, "The fisherman's ring fits perfectly now." Subject's body temperature dropped to 28 degrees Celsius. Heart continued beating for 6 minutes after clinical death. Last words, spoken forward for the first time. Tell them the child is home. Elena's recitation ended in a wet cough. Blood sprayed across the page, mingling with the older stains as if the ledger had been waiting for fresh ink. She swayed, knees buckling, but caught herself on the lectern. The bleeding from her ears was a steady stream now, pattering onto the stone like rain on a coffin. Luca grabbed her, forced her to sit on the rotting pallet. The dust there rose in a cloud that smelled of myrrh and old sweat. "Elena, look at me. Stay with me." Her eyes were glassy, pupils blown wide. "It's inside the words," she whispered. "When you read them aloud, it hears its name." Kane closed the ledger with deliberate care, the iron clasps snapping shut like jaws. Every exorcist who added to this knew the risk. The demon doesn't possess the body first. It possesses the record. Then it waits for someone foolish enough to give it voice. He looked at Elena with something that might have been pity if his eyes weren't so ancient. "You read the last entry," he said. "It knows your voice now." From the corridor behind them came the sound of bare feet on stone, slow, Drag, step, drag, step. The stride of someone very tall, wearing a body that no longer fit quite right. Elena laughed then, a terrible bubbling sound through the blood in her throat. "Tell them the child is home," she repeated, in a voice that was not entirely hers. The Latin came next, backward, perfect, the words slithering out like smoke. Luca pressed his burned palm to her forehead, reciting the only prayer he could still remember through the ruin of his faith. The words tasted like ash. The footsteps stopped just outside the cell door. Something exhaled on the other side, a sound wet and patient, the way a child breathes when it's pretending to sleep, but waiting for you to check under the bed. Kane picked up the ledger and held it to his chest like a shield. "Run," he said. "It's not after you, not yet. It wants the book back." But the door was already opening by itself, hinges screaming though no hand touched them, and in the darkness beyond, two popes who had never truly died smiled with too many teeth, waiting to welcome the child home. Chapter 8. The Gallery of Black Mirrors. The footsteps behind them never hurried. They simply followed, patient as sin, the drag step rhythm echoing through the stone like a heartbeat that had learned to walk. Luca's lungs burned with the taste of old incense and fresh blood, Elena's blood, still dripping from her ears in slow, deliberate drops that hissed when they hit the floor. Kane clutched the exorcist's ledger to his chest, the way a drowning man clutches driftwood, his face pale and shiny with sweat that smelled faintly of myrrh and fear. A narrow archway appeared ahead, no door, just an opening shaped like an inverted keyhole. The air flowing from it was warmer, almost humid, carrying the metallic scent of lightning about to strike. Kane slowed. "We don't have to go this way," he said. It was the first time he'd offered a choice. Luca glanced back. The darkness behind them was no longer empty. Two pale smudges floated in it. Faces, maybe, or the absence of faces. Elena raised her pistol with a hand that no longer shook. The soldier had returned, carved out of pure survival. "Keep moving," she rasped. Blood bubbled at the corner of her mouth when she spoke. They stepped through. The corridor stretched farther than geometry allowed. A perfect straight line that curved away at the edges of vision like a smile held too long. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting nothing. The walls, however, were lined with mirrors, not ordinary mirrors, tall, narrow, framed in black and silver that looked melted and refrozen, dozens of them, hundreds, receding into infinity on both sides. But the reflections were wrong from the first glance. Luca saw himself standing 3 paces ahead of where he actually was. Elena's reflection raised her pistol a heartbeat before she did. Kane's image was missing entirely, as if the glass refused to acknowledge he existed. They walked. With every step, the delay shortened, until the mirrors showed exactly 1 second into the future, a merciless, merciless gift. Luca watched his future self take the next step, then the next, each reflection a perfect echo slightly ahead of reality. The corridor was silent except for their breathing and the soft, inevitable sound of Kane's shoes cracking the mirrors he passed. Hairline fractures bloomed outward from his reflection that wasn't, spiderwebbing across the surface until the glass sighed and fell in shards that never quite hit the floor, vanishing before impact like smoke at the 10th mirror. Luca's future self stopped walking. The reflection turned its head toward him, slowly, deliberately, and opened its mouth in a scream that had no sound yet. The eyes were gone, empty sockets, black and wet, as if something had scooped them out with a burning spoon. Blood poured from the cavities in thick rivulets, tracing the path of tears that hadn't been shed yet. The scream built in Luca's own throat, a pressure behind his teeth, but he clamped it down. 1 second, only 1 second ahead, he took the step anyway. The scream tore out of him the instant reality caught up, raw and animal. He stumbled, hands flying to his face, fingers finding eyes still there, still whole, but the memory of their absence lingered like phantom pain. Tears, real tears, hot and human, streamed down his cheeks. Elena grabbed his arm, nails digging through the cassock. "Don't look," she hissed. "Whatever you do, don't look ahead." But she was looking, in her mirror. Future. Elena stood over Cain's body. The Monsignor lay on the obsidian floor, chest blooming red where her bullet had entered just below the pectoral cross. His eyes were open, surprised, almost gentle. Blood pooled beneath him in the shape of an upside-down key. Future Elena's face was blank, soldier empty, the expression of someone who had finally decided which side the angels were on. She watched herself lower the pistol, watched the smoke curl from the muzzle like incense, watched her future self mouth 2 words she could almost read on her own lips. He knew. The reflection smiled then, a small, sad thing that didn't belong on Elena's face. She wrenched her gaze away, but the image burned behind her eyelids. Her hand tightened on the Beretta until the grip creaked. Cain noticed none of it. He walked as if alone, and the mirrors shattered in his wake like ice under a hammer. Where his reflection should have been, there was only darkness, a deeper black that seemed to drink the lantern light in one cracked pane. Luca thought he saw movement inside that darkness, tall shapes with too many joints, wearing miters that dripped. Halfway down the gallery, the mirrors began to speak, not with voices, with actions. Future Luca clawed at his own face, nails raking bloody furrows across cheeks that were still unmarked in the present. Future Elena pressed the pistol barrel under her own chin, finger whitening on the trigger. The reflections performed these silent pantomimes 1 second ahead, over and over, a loop of coming attractions. Elena's breathing turned ragged. "It's lying," she whispered. "It has to be lying." But the mirrors didn't lie. They simply showed what would happen if you kept walking the path you were already on. Cain stopped before the largest mirror yet, an archway of black glass tall enough to swallow a man whole. His absence in it was absolute, a void that hurt to look at directly. Tiny cracks radiated from the center, spreading with every heartbeat. He turned to them, and for the first time the sorrow in his eyes looked like relief. "You want to know why I've kept this place sealed?" he asked softly. "Because some truths aren't meant to be survived." He stepped forward, not into the mirror, but through it. The glass rippled like water, accepted him, and sealed behind without a sound. The cracks stopped spreading in the sudden silence. The only reflection left was Luca and Elena, standing side by side, 1 second ahead of themselves. Future Luca reached toward the glass with bleeding hands. Future Elena raised the pistol, not at Cain this time, but at Luca. The real Elena's arm lifted in perfect synchronization. Luca saw it coming, saw the decision bloom in her eyes like frost on a window pane. He didn't move, didn't blame her after everything they'd seen. Pulling the trigger might be mercy. The gunshot echoed forever in the gallery of black mirrors. A single, perfect note that shattered every remaining pane at once. Glass rained down in slow motion, each shard showing a different possible future. Luca blind and screaming, Elena with brains on her uniform, Cain smiling from inside the void. When the last piece fell, the corridor was empty. Only the obsidian floor remained, reflecting nothing at all, and somewhere deeper, the child's laughter echoed, delighted, as if the game had finally begun in earnest. Chapter 9. The Relic That Drinks. The shards of the black mirrors crunched under their boots like frozen tears as Luca and Elena stumbled out of the gallery into a chamber that felt, for the first time in hours, almost holy. The air was warmer here, thick with the perfume of roses left too long in water, sweet at first, then cloying, then rotting underneath. Golden lamplight flickered from sconces shaped like seraphim whose wings had been clipped, their faces turned away in shame or sorrow. They were alone. Cain was gone, swallowed by glass that shouldn't have been liquid. The exorcist's ledger lay abandoned on the obsidian floor behind them. Its iron clasps burst open as if something inside had finally grown tired of being recorded. Pages fluttered in a wind that touched nothing else. Elena's hand trembled on her pistol. The barrel now pointed at the empty air. The future she'd seen, her finger pulling the trigger on Cain, hadn't happened, or it had been rewritten the moment he stepped through the mirror. She wizened the blood from her ears with the sleeve of her uniform, leaving dark streaks across the papal coat of arms embroidered on her cuff. Luca felt the absence of Cain like a missing tooth, something you keep probing with your tongue, even though it hurts. The Monsignor had been their reluctant shepherd into hell. Without him, the corridors felt wider, hungrier. A single door stood ahead, small and humble, the kind that belongs on a village chapel, not a vault beneath the throne of Peter. It was made of olive wood, ancient, scarred by what might have been axe blows or desperate fingernails. A tiny window at eye level was barred with silver in the shape of a crown of thorns. Elena approached first. Her reflection in the polished silver was wrong. Her eyes were still there, but they looked tired, centuries tired. Through the window she saw an altar, simple linen cloth, 2 candles burned halfway down, their flames perfectly still, and in the center, on a cushion of faded crimson velvet, a crystal vial no longer than a man's thumb. It caught the candlelight and threw it back in fractured reds, like a ruby held too close to the heart. The vial was half empty or half full, depending on what you believed was being poured in. Luca joined her. His burned palm throbbed as he reached for the latch. "The holy prepuce," he whispered, the words tasting like blasphemy and wonder at once. They said it was lost or destroyed, the relic of the circumcision, Christ's own blood and foreskin, preserved by Longinus or Mary Magdalene or whoever the legend needed that week. Rome's dirty little secret. Elena's voice was hoarse. It's drinking. She was right. The level inside the vial wasn't static. It rose and fell in tiny, deliberate increments, like lungs breathing through glass. Up a millimeter, down, up again. The blood inside was impossibly fresh, bright arterial red, no coagulation, no separation of serum. It coated the crystal walls in a film that caught the light and made the vial look alive. Luca pushed the door. It opened without a sound. The chamber was intimate, almost tender. Frescoes on the walls showed the crucifixion from angles no gospel described, the soldier piercing the side from behind, the Virgin catching the blood in a cup that looked suspiciously like the one before them now, in every scene. A small figure stood in the shadows, a child with too many fingers, watching. On a brass plaque beneath the vial, someone had engraved a single line in Latin, Sanguis Christi, qui in agonia profusus est, nos ab hoste maligno defende, the blood of Christ, shed in agony. Defend us from the evil enemy. But the letters were scratched out in places, rearranged by a later hand into something that made Luca's stomach turn. Sanguis Christi, qui in agonia bibit, nos ab host maligno nutrit, the blood of Christ, which drinks in agony, feeds us to the evil enemy. Elena circled the altar slowly. Every time a cardinal dies upstairs, she said, another mysterious heart attack, another fall down the stairs no one saw. The level rises. I've guarded enough funerals to notice the pattern. They announce the death, and within hours the college is one voice shorter, one soul lighter. Luca couldn't look away from the vial. The blood inside moved with purpose now, swirling in slow spirals that traced the shape of an upside-down key. It's not preserving him, he said. It's preserving something else, using him. He reached out, couldn't stop himself. The scholar, the priest, the fool, all three wanted to touch the untouchable. His fingers closed around the crystal. It was warm, fever warm. The moment skin met glass, the level surged. Not a trickle, a gush. The blood rose so fast it splashed against the sealed stopper, coating the inside in a sudden, obscene wave. Bubbles formed, tiny, perfect, the size of a child's fist, and popped with wet sounds that echoed like kisses. Elena's hand clamped on his wrist. Luca, too late, inside the vial. The blood coalesced. It thickened, darkened, took shape. A hand, tiny, perfect. 6 fingers splayed wide. The palm pressed flat against the crystal from within, directly under Luca's own hand, as if answering a high five from the other side of damnation. The fingers flexed, once. The glass bulged outward under the pressure, a grotesque pregnancy of blood and will. Veins, real veins, blue and pulsing, spread across the surface like frost in reverse. The tiny hand curled, nails scraping the inside of the crystal with a sound like ice cracking on a winter lake. Luca tried to pull away, couldn't. The vial clung to his skin as if magnetized, or as if the blood inside had learned hunger. The hand inside pressed harder. The crystal groaned. A single drop of blood forced its way through the microscopic seal at the stopper and traced a path down the outside of the vial, warm and slick, following the exact route of Luca's lifeline across his palm. Elena raised her pistol, aimed at the vial itself. Let him go. The hand inside paused, tilted, almost curious. Then it waved, slow, mocking. The way a child waves goodbye to a parent it never intends to see again. The candles on the altar snuffed out at once. In the sudden darkness, the vial glowed from within, lit by the blood itself. The tiny hand drew back, formed a fist, and punched. The crystal exploded outward in a silent bloom of shards and crimson. Luca screamed as the blood hit his face, hot, alive, tasting of copper and communion wine. It poured into his mouth, his nose, his burned palm where the ring-shaped wound drank greedily. He felt it slide down his throat like liquid fire, seeking, searching, finding the place where faith used to live. Elena fired, once, twice. The bullets passed through the empty air where the vial had been and buried themselves in the altar cloth. When the emergency lamps flickered on, pale, sickly things set into the walls, the vial was whole again on its cushion, untouched, half empty, but the level had risen, just enough for one more cardinal. Luca collapsed to his knees, coughing blood that wasn't his. On the floor beneath the altar, written in the fresh spill, were words only he could see. "Thank you, Father. You always were my favorite." Elena stared at him, horror dawning as she realized what had just crawled down his throat and made itself at home, somewhere far above, in the apostolic palace. A bell began to toll, slow, solemn, the death knell for a prince of the church who hadn't known he was already gone. Chapter 10. The Midnight Train Beneath Rome. Luca tasted the blood long after the vial had sealed itself again, a copper film on his tongue that no swallowing could wash away. It pulsed there, warm and patient, like a second heartbeat trying to sync with his own. Elena dragged him through corridors that slanted downward in ways that made the inner ear scream, her grip on his wrist the only thing keeping him upright. The soldier in her had taken full command now, jaw set, eyes scanning corners that shouldn't exist. A pistol held low and ready, but her free hand kept flexing, fingers curling as if trying to scrape something off the skin. They didn't speak of what had poured into him. Some truths are too heavy for words. They settle in the chest like stones. The passage widened into a cavern that smelled of diesel and wet stone, the scent of modern machinery forced into ancient dark. Overhead, iron rails gleamed dully, disappearing into a tunnel mouth, perfectly circular, lined with concrete poured sometime after the war. Luca recognized the aggregate mix, the same used in the Führer bunker before it was flooded. A single track, no second line for return, one way out of Rome, or one way deeper in, a platform edged in yellow safety paint, faded now to the color of old teeth, a sign in Italian and Latin, Binario Papale, Riservato, Papal Platform, Reserved. Security monitors, modern, out of place, flickered on a concrete pillar, fed by cables thick as pythons that vanished into the rock. Elena approached them like a woman walking toward her own autopsy photos. She keyed in a code she shouldn't have known. Her fingers moved on their own, muscle memory from a dream she hadn't had yet. And the screens bloomed to life. Grainy night vision footage. Timestamp 03:31:12. The tunnel was empty, then it wasn't. A train slid out of the darkness with no sound, no headlamp, no engine roar, just the soft sigh of brakes and the wet click of couplings settling. White papal carriage, gold trim. The the coat of arms on the side dulled by dust. Every window black, not dark, black, as if the glass had been painted over from the inside. It stopped exactly at the platform edge. Doors did not open, but something got off. The camera caught it in infrared, heat signatures descending the steps one by one, tall, elongated, leaving no footprints on the dust. They moved down the platform toward a maintenance door that led deeper, toward the summer palace at Castel Gandolfo. 40 miles of secret track built in the 1950s when popes still feared Russian tanks rolling down the Via Appia. The figures never looked at the camera. They didn't need to. They knew where it was. Elena fast-forwarded. The train sat for exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds. Then it reversed silently back into the tunnel, swallowed by the dark it had come from. The platform emptied. No one had boarded. No one ever did. She rewound, played it again and again. Luca watched her face in the monitor's glow, pupils blown wide, lips parted as if trying to form a prayer that had forgotten its words. "I've seen this train," she said finally, voice flat. The way people speak when the soul has stepped out for a moment and left the body on autopilot. Every week, same time. I thought it was routine, papal security drill. They told us never to log it. She ejected a USB drive from the console, her own, carried for emergencies, and slipped it into her pocket. Evidence, proof, something to show the world if the world was still there when they surfaced. Luca's throat worked. The blood inside him stirred, curious. That night, if night still meant anything this far under the earth. Elena left him in a small chamber with a cot and a crucifix that bled from the nails when no one was looking. She kissed his forehead, a soldier's kiss, quick and fierce. "Stay here," she whispered. "Guard the door." Then she was gone, uniform jacket buttoned to the throat, Beretta checked and rechecked, flashlight taped to the underside so the beam pointed where the gun did. Luca waited. Hours passed, or minutes. Time had begun to puddle down here, thick and resistant. At what his watch insisted was Euro 3:29, the train came again. He heard it before he saw it, the soft sigh of air displaced, the whisper of wheels on rails that hadn't been used since Pius XII fled Rome in 44. The monitors in the chamber flickered to life on their own. The same footage. Live this time. The doors opened. Elena stood on the platform alone, tiny against the white carriage, pistol hanging loose at her side. She didn't board. She simply waited as the tall heat signatures descended, moving around her the way smoke moves around a candle flame. One paused behind her, leaned in, no face, only suggestion of height and wrong angles, and seemed to whisper in her ear. Elena's shoulders sagged, just slightly, the relief of a soldier finally allowed to stand down. Then she stepped onto the train. The doors closed. The carriage reversed into the tunnel without her ever looking back. Luca screamed her name until his voice shredded. He beat on the chamber door until his knuckles split. No one came. Nothing answered except the soft laughter of a child echoing from the ventilation grate overhead. 3 days later, surface time. The train returned. It stopped at the platform exactly as before. Doors opened. Footsteps descended. Lighter now. Only one set. Elena walked back into the chamber at dawn, uniform pristine, not a speck of dust, not a hair out of place. Her eyes were open but unfocused. The pupils shrunk to pinpricks despite the dark. She sat on the cot without a word and stared at the wall. Luca knelt in front of her. Elena, talk to me. She opened her mouth. No sound came, only a thin trickle of black saliva that smelled of diesel and consecrated wine. He took her hands. They were ice cold. The nails, perfectly manicured, parade ground perfect, had turned pure black. Not bruised, not dirty, black as obsidian, shiny and hard. When he touched them, they felt like glass. For 3 days she didn't speak, didn't sleep, didn't blink. She only stared at the same spot on the wall where faint scratches were appearing, letter by letter, as if an invisible hand wrote with a nail. I saw the palace. The gardens are full of popes who never died. They wait for the next train. They asked about you, Luca. They know what you swallowed. On the third dawn, her voice returned all at once, a child's voice speaking through her throat in perfect, antique Latin. The keys are hungry, Father. The ring fits the child now. Her black fingernails dug into Luca's burned palm, tracing the exact circle of the fisherman's ring that was no longer just a wound. Somewhere far down the tunnel, a train whistle sounded. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. It was coming back, and this time it wouldn't be empty. Chapter 11. The prophecy that ends this year. The train's whistle lingered in the air long after the sound should have faded. A low metallic moan that vibrated in the teeth and the bones of the skull. Elena sat on the edge of the cot like a doll someone had posed and forgotten. Black fingernails drumming a rhythm on her knee. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The same pattern Kane had used in that elevator cage a lifetime ago. Her eyes were fixed on the far wall, where the scratches had stopped spelling words and begun drawing something worse, a papal tiara with horns curling from the cross at its peak. Luca hadn't slept, couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the blood inside him shift, slithering through veins like it was mapping new territory. It had a voice now, soft and reasonable, the way temptation always sounds when it's winning. She's almost ready, Father, almost home. He knelt in front of Elena and took her cold hands in his. The black nails were warm, fever warm, the only part of her that was... We have to keep moving, he said. The train will come again. We find Kane. We find a way out. Elena blinked. Once, slowly. When her eyes opened again, they were clearer. More her own, but ringed in red as if she'd been crying blood she didn't remember shedding. She stood without a word and walked to the chamber door, pressing her palm flat against the metal. The black nails left prints that smoked faintly. The door opened onto a corridor none of them had used before. The walls here were paneled in dark wood, inlaid with mother of pearl that caught the emergency strips and threw back sickly rainbows. Portraits lined the way, popes in profile, stern and serene. But their eyes had been scratched out with something sharp enough to gouge the canvas down to the priming. Every single one. At the end hung a frame, twice the size of the others, empty. The velvet backing was torn, threads hanging like flayed skin. A brass plate beneath read, Petrus Romanus. Elena stopped beneath it. He's already here, she whispered, her first words in 3 days, voice raw from disuse and something else. They showed me the throne room at Castel Gandolfo. It's waiting. The chair is warm. Luca's stomach lurched. Who showed you? She turned. For a moment her face was her own again, terrified and fierce and heartbreakingly young. All of them. The popes who never died. They walk the gardens at night. They wear the white cassock. But the fabric is wrong. It moves when they don't. And they all have the same smile. Her black fingernails dug into his wrist, hard enough to draw blood. They asked if you were coming to the coronation. They walked. The corridor slanted upward for the first time in days. A subtle incline that made the calves burn and the heart hope. Even when hope felt like blasphemy, the air grew drier, cleaner, carrying the faint scent of cypress and lake water. Castel Gandolfo was close, or its memory was. They passed side rooms, where vestments hung on racks like flayed saints, mitres dripping dust, thick as ash, in one. A cardinal's red galero lay on the floor. The tassels knotted into a perfect noose. Then the library, not the archive of horrors below. This was older, papal, the kind of room Michelangelo might have dreamed after too much wine and not enough sleep. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of vellum and gold leaf, rolling ladders frozen midway, as if the last reader had vanished mid-reach. In the center stood a table of black marble veined with gold, and on it, open like a gutted fish, the prophecy of the popes, St. Malachi's list, 112 mottos, 112 popes, from Celestine II in 1143 to the end of days. Historians argued over its authenticity, the way theologians argue over transubstantiation. Some call it forgery, some divine. Most just change the subject. But here it was, the original, the parchment brittle as dead leaves. The ink faded to rust. Luca had studied reproductions. He knew the final line by heart. In persecution es extrema SRE sedibit Petrus Romanus. Quipus ovs in multis tribulationibus, quibus transactus, civitas septicolis diruetur, and judex tremendus, judicabit populum suum. Finis. In the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end, but the manuscript on the table was longer. Someone, Cain's handwriting, Luca recognized the precise Catholic school cursive, had added an addendum on a separate sheet, sewn into the binding with red thread that looked suspiciously like sinew. The date at the top, 1958, the year John III read the Third Secret and allegedly laughed until he cried. Luca read aloud, voice trembling. The 112th is not the last. He is the door, born of the Roman blood that never left the hill, crowned not by cardinals, but by the child who was promised the keys. The end begins when the fisherman's ring cracks in two, November 2025. All saints to all souls. When the dead popes walk the Appian Way again and the obelisk weeps blood at dawn, then Peter the Roman will sit, and the throne will speak with the voice that was denied entrance at Golgotha, and every knee shall bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth. Elena traced the final line with a black nail that left a smoking scar on the parchment. Cain wrote this, she said. He knew. As if summoned by his name, a section of bookshelf swung inward on silent hinges. Cain stood there, older than seemed possible in the days since they'd lost him, hair gone white at the temples, eyes sunken into bruises that looked like thumbprints from something large. In his hands, he held the fisherman's ring, the real one, gold cracked cleanly down the middle, the break revealing a hollow core where something dark and wet gleamed. "You weren't meant to read that," he said, not angry, resigned. "But then, none of us were meant to live this long." Luca's voice cracked. "You knew the successor, Petrus Romanus. Who is it?" Cain smiled, and it was the saddest thing Luca had ever seen on a human face. "The Holy Father chose him years ago, in Pectore, name kept secret even from the college, a priest no one has heard of, humble, obscure, from a village near Naples where the old blood still runs true." He held up the broken ring. The crack appeared the night Elena took the train. The child approved the choice. Elena stepped forward, black fingernails flexing like claws. "Say the name." Cain met her eyes, and for the first time, Luca saw fear in the old Monsignor, real, animal fear. "Luca," he whispered. "Luca Moretti. The successor is you." The library lights flickered once, twice, then steadied on a dim red glow, the color of cardinals' robes and fresh slaughter. Somewhere far above, in the apostolic palace, a bell began to toll the death of a pope who was still breathing, and in the hollow core of the broken ring, something small and six-fingered reached out to take Luca's hand. Chapter 12. The obelisk is a cap, not a trophy. The library door sealed behind Cain with the soft finality of a tombstone settling into place. Luca didn't remember screaming, only the raw ache in his throat afterward and the way the broken fisherman's ring had clattered to the marble like a dropped tooth. Elena stood over him, black fingernails digging into his shoulders, hard enough to bruise. Her face a mask of fury and grief, and something colder, recognition. "You," she whispered, the word cracking like ice. All this time, the blood knew. Luca scrambled back, cassock tangling around his legs, the blood inside him surging in delighted waves. It had a name for itself now, spoken in the child's voice that lived behind his eyes. Home. Finally home. Elena raised her pistol. The barrel didn't waver. In the red emergency glow, she looked like an avenging angel carved from obsidian and rage. "Do it," Luca said. His own voice sounded distant, layered with something older. "Before she fired. The bullet punched through his shoulder instead of his head, spinning him sideways into the Malachi manuscript. Pain exploded white-hot, real, human, anchoring him for one blessed second. Blood, his blood, not the thing inside, poured warm down his arm. "Not yet," Elena snarled. "You don't get to die clean." She hauled him up by the collar, stronger than she had any right to be, and dragged him through a side door that opened onto a maintenance stair spiraling upward, real upward. The air changed with every flight, from the crypt damp of the vaults to the dry, sun-baked scent of Rome above. They were surfacing. Luca's vision blurred. The blood in his veins sang, trying to knit the bullet wound closed with threads of something that wasn't tissue. Elena's grip was the only thing keeping him moving, her black nails leaving crescent moons in his skin. They emerged through a service hatch behind the sacristy and into the shadow of St. Peter's itself. Night had fallen hard over the square, November 22nd, 2025. The city lights smeared by fog rolling off the Tiber. Tourists were long gone. Only a handful of Swiss guard patrolled the colonnades, their halberds catching the floodlights like silver accusations. In the center stood the obelisk, 40 meters of red granite hauled from Heliopolis by Caligula, re-erected by Domenico Fontana in 1586 under Sixtus V. History books called it a triumph of engineering. 327 tons moved by 900 men and 75 horses. The only time in recorded history a pope ordered absolute silence on pain of death during the operation. Ropes creaked, capstans groaned, and not a man dared whisper, because Sixtus believed the obelisk carried a demon in its shadow. Luca had always thought that story quaint. Papal superstition. Now he knew better. Seismic monitors, modern ones, installed after the 2016 earthquake, were clustered at the base like metallic flowers. Their screens glowed red, needles dancing in perfect synchronization. Thump, thump, thump. The same cadence as the knocks that had started everything under the Basilica floor. The same rhythm Elena's black fingernails had drummed on her knee. The same heartbeat Luca felt echoing inside his own chest, growing louder, stronger, hungry. The guards saw them, saw Elena's blood-streaked uniform, Luca's ruined shoulder, and started forward. Elena raised her pistol with her free hand and fired twice into the air. The shots cracked across the square like thunder. The guards froze. Protocol didn't cover one of their own, going rogue in front of 10,000 years of history. "Stay back," she shouted, voice ragged but commanding. "This is above your clearance." They obeyed. Swiss Guard training dies hard. She dragged Luca across the piazza, boots splashing through puddles that reflected the obelisk like a dagger plunged into the heart of the square. The pounding from below grew louder with every step, vibrating up through the cobblestones into their bones. The obelisk itself seemed to thrum, the hieroglyphs carved into its sides flickering in the floodlights, as if the ancient Egyptian spells were waking up to see who dared approach. Luca tried to speak, to warn her, but the blood inside him surged up his throat, choking him with the taste of communion wine gone bad. They reached the base. The seismic screens were screaming now, needles pegged. The pounding was deafening. A titan's fist against the underside of the world. Thump, thump, thump. Elena released Luca and placed both palms flat against the granite. The pounding stopped, instantly, completely. Silence rushed in so absolute it hurt the ears. The guards in the distance lowered their weapons, confused. Even the fog seemed to pause. Elena's face went slack with relief. "It's over," she breathed. Whatever was trying to... Then her eyes widened. The pounding started again, inside her chest. Thump, thump, thump. Slow at first, then faster, matching the rhythm perfectly. Her uniform bulged over her sternum, as if something beneath the ribs was flexing, testing the cage. Black veins spiderwebbed across her throat, racing upward to her jaw. Her black fingernails lengthened with an audible crack, curling like talons. Luca fell to his knees in front of her. "Elena, no!" She looked down at him, and for one heartbreaking second, she was there, terrified, tears cutting clean tracks through the blood on her cheeks. "It's not me anymore," she whispered. It never was. Her hand, her taloned hand, cupped his cheek with terrible gentleness. The pounding inside her chest became a roar, shaking the obelisk itself. Cracks appeared in the granite, racing upward from the base like lightning in reverse. Hieroglyphs bled dust that smelled of desert sand and old graves. From the top of the obelisk, the bronze cross with its reliquary ball, said to contain a fragment of the true cross, began to weep something darker than rust. Elena smiled then, and it was not her smile. "Thank you, Sergeant," said the child's voice through her lips. "You carried me far enough." Her chest split open, not with gore, but with light, a blinding, golden light that poured out like the sun rising from hell. Inside the cavity, something moved, tall, elongated, wearing a white cassock that billowed though no wind stirred. The obelisk shuddered, and deep below, every sealed door in the vaults began to open at once. Chapter 13. The night the angels turned away. The light from Elena's splitting chest poured upward in a column of gold so pure it burned, illuminating the obelisk from within like a lantern made of flesh and fury. Cracks raced higher, splitting hieroglyphs that hadn't been read aloud since pharaohs feared the dark. The bronze cross at the top wept thicker now. The relic inside, supposedly a splinter of the true cross, bleeding something black and viscous that hissed when it hit the granite. Luca knelt in the puddle of Elena's blood, his own shoulder wound forgotten. The thing inside him sang with triumph, a child's lullaby in a language that predated Babel. He could feel it stretching, testing the new space it had claimed in her body, the way a hermit crab tries on a larger shell. Elena, no, not Elena anymore, tilted her head at an angle no human neck should allow. The smile that stretched her lips was too wide, the teeth behind it too many. "Watch," it said through her mouth, voice layered with 1,000 choirs, all singing one note flat. "Watch them turn away. They always do." The guards in the colonnades had dropped their halberds and were backing toward the basilica doors, crossing themselves in frantic unison. One vomited onto the cobblestones. Another simply sat down and began to pray in a language that sounded like sobbing. High above, in the Sistine Chapel, the night shift guard, a young recruit from Ticino named Matteo, made his rounds with the bored precision of someone who had walked the same route every night for 6 months. The chapel was empty, the lights dim to preserve the frescoes, only the emergency strips glowing along the floor like runway lights for departing souls. He paused beneath the Last Judgment, craning his neck at Michelangelo's masterpiece the way tourists do, but with the weary familiarity of ownership, the damned writhing toward hell, the saved ascending toward Christ's terrible mercy. He'd seen it so many times the images had lost their power to shock. His radio crackled, static, then a child's voice, clear as chapel bells. "Matteo, look up." He froze. The security cameras, 47 of them, hidden in cornices and behind altars, were all feeding to the central monitor in the guard booth. Matteo had left the booth door open. The screens glowed in the darkness like aquarium windows into another world. At exactly 3:33 a.m. on All Souls Day 2025, the timestamp burned white across every feed. Something changed. It was subtle at first, a trick of the light, perhaps. The angels painted around the perimeter of the ceiling, those serene, muscular figures blowing trumpets for the risen dead. seemed to shift, not the whole bodies, just the heads, slowly, deliberately, one by one. They turned their faces to the wall. Matteo watched it happen live on the monitors, his own feed included. In the chapel itself, he saw nothing. His eyes weren't fast enough, or holy enough, or damned enough. But the cameras caught every degree of rotation. The painted necks twisting with audible cracks that the microphones picked up like knuckles breaking. He ran to the chapel doors, fumbled with keys that suddenly felt too small for his fingers. By the time he flung them open and stared upward, flashlight beam shaking, the angels were still, faces forward, serene as always, but on the monitors. They had turned completely around. Michelangelo never painted the backs of their heads. There were no backs of heads to paint, yet there they were, raw, wet plaster where golden curls and halos should have been, dripping something darker than fresco pigment. The exposed surface looked newly applied, as if an invisible hand had taken a trowel and erased 5 centuries of genius in minutes. Cracks spider-webbed outward from each turned neck, spreading across the vault like frost on glass. Matteo's scream echoed off the marble, high and thin, the sound a man makes when he realizes the sky has eyes and they've decided not to look at him anymore. In St. Peter's Square, the column of light from Elena's chest pulsed once, in perfect synchronization with the turning. The obelisk shuddered and leaned, actually leaned a fraction of a degree, enough for the bronze cross to screech against its housing. The cracks reached the top. The relic ball split open like an egg, and what spilled out was not wood from Golgotha. It was a feather, black, glossy, long as a man's forearm. It drifted down slowly, turning end over end, and landed on Luca's outstretched palm beside the broken fisherman's ring. The blood inside him laughed with delight. Above, in the chapel, the cameras kept recording, one by one. The turned angels began to weep. Not painted tears, real ones, welling from the raw plaster, running down the walls in rivulets that smoked where they touched the floor. The smell reached Matteo through the ventilation, frankincense and sulfur, roses and rot. He backed away until his shoulders hit the doors. On the central monitor, the feed from the chapel's main camera zoomed in on its own, no human hand on the controls, as if the lens itself had decided what needed to be seen. The largest angel, the one directly above the altar, had turned farthest. Its face was no longer against the wall. It was gone entirely, leaving a hole in the fresco the size of a man's torso. Through the hole, something looked down. Not eyes. Not exactly. Matteo pissed himself. The warmth spread down his leg unnoticed. The thing in the hole smiled with Michelangelo's stolen mouth and spoke with the child's voice that had whispered to Elena in the archive, to Luca in the vial, to every guard who had ever stood watch and pretended not to hear the knocking. They know what's coming, it said. They've always known. That's why they turn away, not in shame, in mercy. The hole widened. Plaster rained down in chunks the size of fists, revealing not sky, not scaffolding, but darkness, a darkness that moved with purpose. In the square, Elena's body, vessel, puppet, doorway, lifted off the ground, her arms spread wide, black nails catching the floodlights like obsidian daggers. The white cassock of the thing inside her billowed, though no wind stirred, the hem already stained with the blood of cardinals who had died to fill a vial. Luca looked up at it, and felt the blood inside him rise to meet its twin. The obelisk cracked along its entire length with a sound like the world splitting open, and from the basilica roof, every statue of every saint turned its head at once, stone grinding on stone, to watch the child finally come home. Chapter 14. The Cardinal Who Never Died. The column of light from Elena's ruined chest collapsed as suddenly as it had risen, folding in on itself with a sound like silk, ripping in reverse. The fog rushed back into the square, thicker now, tasting of river mud and candle smoke. The obelisk stood cracked but upright, its wounds already scabbing over with some black resin that hardened in seconds, sealing the breach the way a scab seals a cut no one wants to explain. Elena's body, what was left of it, hung in the air a moment longer, arms outstretched, black nails dripping. Then it folded forward at the waist with a wet crack of spine, and whatever had worn her like a coat stepped out. It was tall, too tall. The white cassock hung on a frame that had never been human, the hem brushing the cobblestones without quite touching them. The face was beautiful in the way statues are beautiful before the stone remembers it's supposed to be dead. Golden curls, childlike, framed eyes that held the color of old communion wine held too long to the light. It smiled at Luca with Elena's mouth, then it walked, barefoot, soundless, toward the basilica doors that had swung open on their own, as if the building itself had decided to invite the end inside. Luca followed. He didn't choose to. His legs simply moved, the blood inside him pulling like a leash. The guards were gone. Some lay unconscious. Others had fled, screaming into the Roman night. Sirens wailed in the distance, thin and useless, inside the basilica. The lights were wrong. The great nave stretched longer than architecture allowed, the pillars leaning inward like ribs closing around a meal. The Pietà wept real tears now, clear tracks down the Virgin's marble cheeks. Every candle in every side chapel had relit itself, flames burning blue and steady, throwing shadows that moved against the light. The thing in the white cassock led him down, not through the main stairs the tourists know, but through a side door behind the confession, down a servant's passage, so old the steps had worn into scoops. The temperature rose with every flight, humid and close, until the air tasted of bodies pressed too long together in prayer. They passed the necropolis level without stopping. The iron gate hung open, twisted off its hinges as if something large had grown impatient. The empty seventh bier was gone, leaving only scorch marks in the shape of a man. Deeper, a level Luca had never seen, never heard whispered, even in the worst rumors. The walls here were not carved. They were grown, organic curves of pale stone, veined with something that pulsed faintly red. The smell was overwhelming. Lilies left in a sick room, copper pennies some under a tongue, the particular sweetness of a corpse 3 days old in summer. At the end of the corridor, a single chamber, round, domed, no door anymore, just an archway that bled slow drops of wax from its keystone, as if the stone itself had been a candle once and remembered. Inside sat Cardinal Giovanni Moretti, no relation to Luca, thank God, but the coincidence of names had always amused them both at clerical dinners. Giovanni had been everyone's favorite, the smiling cardinal from Milan, beloved for his work with orphans, his gentle homilies that made grandmothers weep happy tears. Announced dead in 2019, heart attack in his apartments, body discovered by his secretary. The Vatican had handled everything with unusual speed. No public viewing, no funeral mass open to the press, cremation within hours. Ashes interred in a side chapel with a plaque that read simply, "He loved much." The family had begged for the body, been refused. Canon law, the statement said, health regulations. Whispers followed, conspiracy nuts claiming autopsy cover-up, traditionalists muttering about hasty cremation against church preference. The rumors died quick. People had short memories for dead princes of the church. Giovanni sat upright in a plain wooden chair that looked borrowed from a sacristy, red cassock immaculate, pectoral cross gleaming, hands folded in his lap as if in prayer, eyes open, very open. He had not decayed, not one day in 6 years. The skin was pale but flawless, the cheeks still round with the plumpness of a man who'd enjoyed his pasta. Lips parted just enough to show teeth too white, too even. He could have been waiting for an audience that was running late. The thing in the white cassock entered first and took position behind the chair, one 6-fingered hand resting lightly on the cardinal's shoulder. Giovanni's head tilted at the touch, affectionate, the way a dog leans into its master's hand. Luca stopped in the doorway, the blood inside him quieted, listening. Giovanni's eyes tracked him. Slowly, the pupils were wrong, vertical slits, like a cat's in torchlight. "Luca," the cardinal said, voice exactly as Luca remembered from Christmas dinners, warm, Lombard accent, a hint of laughter always underneath. "You came. I knew you would. Curious boy. Always were." Luca's mouth went dry. "You're dead." "Am I?" Giovanni smiled wider. "They told the family I was cremated. A lie to keep them from looking. Bodies are troublesome things. They ask questions when they don't burn." He lifted one hand, slow, deliberate, and beckoned. The skin on the palm was smooth, unmarked, no livor mortis, no rigor that had ever set. "Come closer. Let me give you my blessing, one priest to another." Luca's feet moved without permission. The blood pulled. He crossed the chamber until he stood directly in front of the cardinal, close enough to smell the lilies and copper. Giovanni's eyes never blinked. Luca reached out, couldn't stop himself, and gently, reverently, tried to close those staring eyes the way he'd closed his mother's the day she died. His fingers touched the lids. The cardinal's hand snapped up with impossible speed and clamped around Luca's wrist. Bone ground on bone. The grip was cold, but not dead cold. Something worse, preserved. Giovanni leaned forward until their faces were inches apart. When he spoke again, it was in Luca's own voice, perfect down to the slight abruzzo roll on the R's. "You were always too curious, Father." The cardinal's mouth didn't move on the last word. The voice came from inside Luca's skull, intimate as thought. Luca tried to pull away, couldn't. Giovanni's eyes rolled back, revealing not whites but smooth skin, as if eyelids had grown on the inside too. The smile stretched until the corners of the mouth tore. Soundlessly, bloodlessly, behind the chair, the thing in the white cassock bent low and whispered into the cardinal's ear, in the child's Latin, sweet and poisonous. Giovanni's free hand rose and traced the sign of the cross on Luca's forehead with a nail that had grown long and black beneath the red sleeve. Ego te absolvo, the cardinal said, still using Luca's voice. From what you're about to become. The grip tightened, bones creaked. Luca felt something crawl from the cardinal's palm into his own, a thread of cold that raced up his arm and wrapped around the blood already living in his veins. Giovanni's head fell forward then, chin to chest, the way a puppet's does when the strings are cut, but the hand kept holding, and from the darkness behind the chair, dozens of other figures stepped forward, cardinals, bishops, popes in rotting white, all sitting upright in chairs that hadn't been there moments ago, their eyes open, their mouths smiling, waiting their turn. Luca screamed, but the sound came out as the child's laughter, and deep in the vaults, every sealed door that had opened began to laugh with him. Chapter 15. The ceiling that failed. They poured the concrete at dawn on November 23rd, 2025, while Rome still slept off the nightmares it refused to name. Emergency floodlights turned the piazza the color of old bone. 6 trucks idled in a semicircle, their drums turning slow and hypnotic, churning a mix laced with enough holy water to drown a legion of demons, if demons could still be drowned. Cardinals in plain black suits stood at a safe distance, faces gray with exhaustion and something that looked a lot like surrender. The Swiss guard formed a cordon no one was testing. The ones who had seen Elena's chest open had been quietly reassigned to posts in Antarctica or simply disappeared from the roster. Luca stood in the trench beneath the confessio, shoulder crudely bandaged, the bullet wound already closing with unnatural speed. The blood inside him purred approval. He watched the first load sluice down the rebuilt archway like wet grave dirt, thick and gray, swallowing the frost patterns, the upside-down keys, the place where everything had begun. Monsignor Victor Kane stood beside him, coat unbuttoned for the first time in 50 years. The man looked hollowed out. A candle burned to the wick. His eyes were fixed on the pouring concrete, as if he could still see through it to the vaults below, to the chairs full of cardinals who had never been allowed to rot. 50 years, Luca thought. Kane had been 25 when Pius XIV first showed him the vaults, young enough to believe he could hold the line, old enough to understand what the line would cost. You knew this would happen, Luca said, not an accusation, just fact, heavy as the concrete. Kane's laugh was a dry, broken thing. I knew the day I took the oath. They don't tell you the seal isn't on the doors. Luca, the seal is you. Your soul poured into the cracks like mortar. I've been leaking for decades. He reached into his coat and drew out the broken fisherman's ring. The gold had turned black overnight. The crack now a gaping mouth. Something inside it moved, slow, larval. I was supposed to be the last, Kane whispered, the final vessel. But the child grew impatient. It wanted someone younger, someone curious. Luca met his eyes and saw the truth there. Kane had fought for half a century, not to save the world, but to delay this exact moment. Every exorcism, every sealed door, every cardinal quietly disappeared, delaying actions bought with his own damnation. A tragic guardian who had known from the beginning that the seal would fail the instant someone like Luca asked one question too many. Above them, the concrete kept pouring. The trucks groaned. Workers in hazmat suits guided the chutes with poles blessed in the blood of a living saint. Rumor said it was the Pope himself. A pinprick in the finger during a private mass no one would ever confirm. The flow reached the final section, the bricked-up arch behind the confessio, the original breach, the place where Elena had first heard the knocking answer back. The concrete hesitated, not a clog, not air in the line. It bulged. A bubble the size of a child's fist rose on the surface of the wet pour, trembled, and burst with a sound like a kiss. Another followed, then a dozen. The gray sludge began to ripple, as if something underneath was swimming upward. The workers stepped back. One crossed himself so hard his rosary snapped. Then the singing started, soft at first. A single child's voice, the same Latin lullaby that had whispered to Elena in the archive, to Luca as in the vial, to every soul that had ever stood watch and pretended not to hear. Ave verum corpus natum, but the words were wrong, twisted. Ave verum corpus fractum, de Maria Virgine, vere passum, immolatum, in crus pro homine. The voice multiplied, 10 voices, 100, 1,000, rising from inside the wet concrete like a choir buried alive and delighted to be found. The sound wasn't muffled by the slurry. It was amplified, vibrating through the pour, making the surface dance in perfect waves that formed the upside-down keys of Peter again and again. The workers dropped their tools and ran. The cardinals fled. Even the Swiss guard broke ranks, some falling to their knees in the square, pressing foreheads to the cobblestones, as if the stone itself could grant absolution. Lucas didn't move. Cain didn't move. The concrete set faster than physics allowed, hardening into a wall that looked centuries old in seconds. The singing faded to a whisper, then to a promise. We'll wait inside the walls now, closer than before. Cain placed the broken ring in Luca's hand. The metal was warm, pulsing. I held the line as long as I could, he said. Your turn. Then he walked into the fresh wall, not through it, into it. The concrete accepted him like water, swallowing coat, flesh, and finally the sorrowful smile. A handprint remained on the surface, 6 fingers, perfect, already cracking as the pour cured. Luca stood alone in the trench, above, in a dead man's server hidden behind 1,000 proxies, and a countdown timer set for this exact hour. Elena's body cam footage began uploading. The file name was simple, Feather. It went live on 12 dark mirrors of the internet, places priests and conspiracy theorists and terrified teenagers would find within hours. The video opened with her standing on the midnight train platform, black fingernails drumming that final rhythm, her last coherent words, whispered to the camera before she boarded. If you're watching this, it's too late for us, but maybe not for you. Choose better than we did. The footage rolled, the vaults, the mirrors, the vial, the obelisk, the angels turning away, Giovanni's grip, the child stepping out of her chest, wearing her skin like a coat it had outgrown. The final frame was live, a fixed camera in the Basilica, one of the thousands that fed the Vatican's security net, now hijacked and streaming to anyone who knew where to look. The marble floor beneath the high altar, freshly cleaned, newly consecrated, began to crack, slow at first. a hairline fracture tracing the exact spot where Elena had first heard the knocking, then wider. The camera's microphone picked up the sound, 3 slow knocks rising from below. Thump, thump, thump. A single black feather drifted down from the dome, turning lazily in the floodlights, and settled on the widening crack. The screen went black, but the comments kept coming. Feather, 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 and somewhere beneath the holiest floor on earth, something that had waited since the nails went in finally stood up, stretched 6-fingered hands, and began to walk toward the throne that had always been promised. The concrete held, for now, but the song never really stopped. You just have to listen closely, especially at 3:33 a.m. when the angels have turned away. If you stayed with me through all 15 chapters, type feather in the comments and tell me when the knocking starts under your bed tonight. Will you answer back? Because some doors were never meant to stay sealed, and some children never learned to stay dead. See you in the next vault. Stay curious.